Hello, everyone. I hate that we are in this platform yet again for learning, but hopefully we get to come back together soon. The purpose of this video is to walk you through today's lesson, also to outline some of the activities that you're going to be completing today and tomorrow in our first day of this poetry mini unit. Now, this is our last unit of study before your final exam, the last thing that we're fitting in on these final days. We only have a short time left together, which is sad, but we are also reaching that end point. So we need to make sure that we get everything done that we need to get done. I'll talk about your TED Talk at the end of this video. So please make sure we are focusing on this stuff first, getting these assignments complete. And then I'll show you and give you opportunity to ask questions about your TED Talk. So poetry terms is what we are starting with. Hopefully these are some things that you have heard before, have been introduced to before, possibly in the past, maybe even last year in English 3 as well. I'm not really sure what you focus on in those classes, so I just want to make sure that we break it down into the basics before we jump into poetry. Now, I do not want you to be afraid of poetry. I don't want you to think that poetry is this really scary, intense thing that you cannot understand. Where we're going to break it down, and hopefully it will make a lot of sense to you in how you can interpret these poems as well. This is a skill you're going to need to know, especially if you are planning to go into AP English next year or even English 5. I want you to be successful in those courses, so I want you to be aware of how to interpret this poetry. I will say before we get started, I hope you had a wonderful winter break. I meant to lead with that. I'm, again, very sad that I don't get to see your faces today, but hopefully we are back together on Wednesday and Thursday, and I get to hear all about your winter break and what you got up to and what Santa Claus brought you. I truly am interested in that. Again, I hate we're not together today. So the things that we are going to do today, the first thing we're going to go through poem structure terms, just basic structure of poetry. We're going to go through rhythm, meter, and form. We're going to go through those very rapidly, and a lot of it is also going to be self-directed on certain documents. But I'm going to talk to you very briefly about those. We're going to go through a poetic figurative language. A lot of that is stuff that you have heard before, stuff we've even talked about in this class before. You will have a very brief lesson check to complete on Google Classroom. It's just my form of taking attendance for today's class. And then you're going to begin reading poem number 1. What's truly due today, what you need to be working on today, is going through this video and going through these notes. I won't be checking poem number 1 until we get together in class on Wednesday and Thursday. You will have poem 1 assigned to you today. It's what we would have done in class together if we were there. And then you will have poem number 2 assigned to you for your at-home assignment tomorrow alongside your working on your TED Talk. But I'll tell you that due dates for those are pretty flexible as we go through this. Okay, so first, what you are going to do, I recommend you actually pause this video, move this video to the side, and open up this document as we go through it. I am going to go through it on this video, so you will get to see this too. But the structure of a poem and what a poem is what we are going to talk about pretty briefly here. Poets utilize structural elements in poetry in order to successfully convey the meaning of their work. That is what we're trying to get into with the structure of a poem. How is this structure actually informing our understanding of the novel or the poem itself? We're going to talk about form, stanza structure, rhythm and meter, line structure, sound effects, and figurative language. We will break all of these down a little bit more specifically in other slides and documents in this video, but this is just to give you a very brief overview. This should be a reference document that you save to your Google Drive and that you actually go through and edit and add things to in order to help you interpret this poetry. So the first thing that we are going to talk about is form and stanza structure. So I'm going to take us back to our presentation. So the first thing is stanza structure. There are several different types of stanzas, and one way to understand stanza structure is to count the number of lines in a stanza, and that's going to contribute to form and typical poetic forms we'll talk about a little later. So there are specific names. I'm not requiring you to know these names. I just want you to be exposed to them, aware of them if you hear them in the future. But if a stanza has 2 lines, it's a couplet, 3 lines, tercet, 4 lines, quatrain, 5 lines, cinquain, 6 lines, sestet, 7 lines, septet, and 8 lines, an octave. So again, I'm not going to ask you to tell me those names or even answer those on a quiz or a test or even on your final exam, but I just do want you to know what those terms are. So like I mentioned, how a poet chooses to structure their words is important. Stanzas are often deliberately organized to serve a purpose, meaning that they are grouped for a reason. They're not just grouped together because it looks pretty or that they rhyme. They're grouped normally to convey the message of the poem. This may be in order to group ideas or images together to indicate a change in tone, idea, or focus, or the stanza breaks can be used as a pause for thought, basically operating the same way that maybe a comma would. So what we're going to do, I want you to pause the video now and read through this poem. This is our first, technically, poem, but we're doing it together. This is actually your deep dive and your dip, very brief dip into modern poetry, modern British poetry. This poem is Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. If you've seen the movie Interstellar, it's used pretty often throughout that film. But it is by Dylan Thomas, written in 1951, again, that modern poetry, and he is a Welsh poet. So he's actually our first author of a Welsh descent in this class. We figured I'd toss some of that in there for British literature. So take a moment, pause the video now to read through this poem. Okay, we're going to talk about this poem together, and we are only really going to talk about it on the basis of stanza structure and how that contributes to the message. So this poem is written by a speaker who is talking to, or necessarily talking to, his dying father. That's why he is saying, do not go gentle into that good night. Night is supposed to be the stand-in for death, kind of making it sound a little nicer than saying death over and over and over again. If we look at the structure of this poem, it's actually called a villanelle on the actual structure of this poem, 19 lines long, and then it has these different breakdowns. So if we go back to our types of stanzas, we see that if a poem has stanzas with 3 lines, it is a tercet. So we have 5 tercets in this poem, and then we have 1 quatrain. So we have that 4-line stanza right at the end. That is the typical structure of a villanelle poem. It is 19 lines long, 5 different stanzas that are tercets, and then 1 stanza that is a quatrain. The messages of this poem, based on this structure, are introduced in the first stanza and concluded in the final stanza. So really what he uses the structure of this poem to do is to make an argument to his father. If we look at the first stanza together, do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. What he's saying here in this introduction stanza is that when you become old, when you reach old age, you shouldn't just give up. You shouldn't just go into the darkness. You shouldn't just die without putting up some kind of fight. He's saying this because it's painful to look at his dying father. I'm saying he, as we know who the speaker is, but the speaker is saying that you need to rage against death so that when you go into it, you're not just giving up. And he goes and makes this argument by the following stanzas, introducing different types of men: wise men, good men, wild men, and grave men. Those are those body stanzas there. He's basically saying that wise men, even though their words have said nothing, their knowledge has done really nothing for them in the end because everyone's going to die. They keep trying. They keep searching for that knowledge. Good men, they have done all these good deeds. They've led to nothing because they're still going to die. But they need to keep going and raging into the dying of the light. And we have these wild men who have just had a great time on earth, but they have learned that grief also comes with that, but they're not just going to give up. They're not just going to go into this death without trying and continuing and having a good time. And we have grave men, this last one. These are men who know about death, who know that is the inevitable end, but they keep trying and they are jolly and they keep pushing through even though they are aware that's the end. So then he ends this poem by saying, and you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears. I pray, do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. What the speaker is saying in this poem is trying to make an argument to his father. Do not give up. Keep going. Keep going into this good night. Even though it's death, even though it's the inevitable, you have to keep pushing. So really what his overall message of this poem is shown through this stanza structure is that violent, hopeless resistance to the inevitable is what this man really needs to do. He needs to resist the inevitable, even though it is, in the end, inevitable, even though it is going to happen. That man is going to die. It's basically this human desire or human need to fight against the inevitable. And that's really the message that Dylan Thomas is trying to push with this poem. It's why it's been used a bunch in popular media, especially in Interstellar. Do not go gentle into that good night. Do not go into death without a fight. You have to fight for what you want, what you believe in, what you desire out of life. You have to put in that kind of fight. Okay? I would ask if there's any questions, but you can't answer me because this is a recorded video, so we're going to keep going. So the next thing we're going to talk about, it was on that big list of menu of what we're going to talk about today of poem structure, is line structure. Now this is not as important to me in this class as stanza structure is, because it doesn't show you as much as stanza structure does, in my opinion. But we have three different types of line structure we're going to talk about: end stopped, enjambment, and caesura. So when there is a break at the end of a line, denoted by a comma, a period, or a semicolon, or other punctuation mark, that line is end stopped. So that means that when you get to the end of the line, it is done. And the effect of this is that there's a brief pause created between lines, meaning that possibly an idea is done, or they just want that line to be that line and not much to change. Then we have enjambment, which is the continuation of a sentence or a clause over a line break. We saw this a lot with Shakespeare's play, Macbeth, that the line continued moving when there wasn't necessarily a comma, a period, or a semicolon involved. The line just moved down to the next one. That just means that the thought is continuing to run on. Enjambment can go on for an entire stanza, several stanzas. They don't need commas, periods, or semicolon, any kind of punctuation to end a thought. Then we have caesura, which is a strong pause or a stop within a line. It means it will usually occur in the middle of a line of poetry, but can occur towards the beginning or end of a line. I don't necessarily need to go into too much detail about caesura. I'm not going to ask you too much about it. We saw a lot of this with Beowulf. Okay. Let's see. Go to the next slide. So here are some examples. You can pause and read through them. We're not going to waste too much time going through them, but it's just examples of the different kinds. You can see the end stopped punctuation in there. You can see the examples of that enjambment, and then you can see that caesura as well. It says end stopped on here. I did not edit that. It is caesura. Okay, the next one is rhythm and meter. Some of this should be pretty simple to you. Some of it we have talked about when we talked about iambic pentameter. Again, I'm not asking you to memorize these different terms. If you're going to take AP Lit, and that will be AP English, sorry, that is what you will have to memorize and you will have to be aware of. It will honestly help you write your AP language essays on the exam. But right now, it's not my purpose for you to necessarily memorize that and know that. I'm just introducing these topics to you. So the first thing we're talking about is a syllable. You should know what that is. They should have taught you that in elementary school. If they didn't, get your money back. So a syllable is a single unit of sound found in a word consisting of a vowel sound with or without surrounding consonants. So when a syllable is emphasized, it's called a stressed syllable. Think about the word water. It is made up of two syllables, wa and ter. The wa part of that word, whenever you say it, is the emphasized syllable. So that is the stressed syllable. And then the ter is the unstressed syllable. Now, whenever you look at a word, you are considering a foot, which is a combination of a stressed and unstressed syllable. There are many different possible combinations of these. We use the following symbols to mark them: the dash for stressed and the U for unstressed. Now, there are different types of feet that we're just not going to get into because it gets very complicated and gets very wordy. But these are the different sides on the, if you see them on the right side of your screen: iamb, trochee, spondee, and a pest. And you will go over those if you take AP Lit next year. Now, what goes with those different words used to describe the types of feet are the words used to describe meter, and normally they'll go together, feet and meter. But the meter is the number of feet in a line. So you like manometer, dimeter, trimeter, tetrameter, pentameter, hexameter, heptameter, and the octameter. So you look at here, we are pretty familiar with pentameter, hopefully. If you know iambic pentameter, we see here iamb is a type of foot, and then pentameter is just a line with 5 feet. So that's what Shakespeare writes in a lot, and we actually see that with the second poem you read, one of his sonnets. But these, again, are the different types of words used to describe meter. Again, I'm not asking you to memorize this, just introducing them to you. Okay, the next two documents are going to be pretty self-directed as you read through them. I'm not going to go through everything with you, but these are the things that you will be held accountable for. The first one is poetic sound effects and figurative language. So go ahead and open that document, or you can just follow along on this video with me. Now, poetic sound effects are something that you've probably studied in the past, hopefully studied in the past. One of the most important one of the most clear and easy ones to find there is rhyme. So this document outlines these different definitions of poetic sound effects, specifically of rhyme, alliteration, assonance, consonants. But you should be pretty familiar with those. The ones I am going to talk about that we have not talked about in this class before are assonance and consonants. You might have talked about them in the past. But assonance is very similar to alliteration, but it is the repetition of vowel sounds within a word. So if you look down here at the example, I've highlighted the similar vowel sounds within a word. So that's that difference there. And then consonants is the repetition of consonant sounds anywhere within the words. So again, that's not alliteration. The repeating sound is within the word. So you look here, the example I've highlighted them red, we have the repetition of that L sound. But it is within the word, it is not at the start. So when you're talking about this word, you can still have the repetition of anything at the start or the words throughout the sentence, but if it's in the middle, that is going to be consonants. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Now, if you scroll all the way down, there's a chart that goes through different figurative language. In poetry, most of these we have talked about, so I'm not going to repeat that, but I do want you to read through it and look at the examples. But metaphor, simile, personification, hyperbole, pun, oxymoron, anaphora, and allusion. We've talked about all of those in English 4. The two that we have not really necessarily talked about too much, we might have talked about euphemism, but we definitely did not talk about synecdoche. But euphemism is a softer, more inoffensive word or phrase used as a substitute for one considered too harsh. So what you say, kick the bucket, even though that does sound a little bit worse than saying he died, but that is technically a euphemism. And then we have synecdoche, which is a figure of speech in which a part is used to represent the whole or the whole for a part. For an example here from William Shakespeare, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. He is saying lend me your ears, but he doesn't necessarily mean rip off your ear and hand it to me. He is just saying lend me your ears to be representative of give me your attention. I want to talk to you. I need you to pay attention. Hopefully that makes sense as well. Okay, the next thing I need you to click on is the poetic forms document. Now, this document outlines different types of popular poetic forms. I want you to go through this document. You're going to read about the different types of poetry, from an acrostic poem to a ballad, free verse, sonnet, villanelle. We just read a villanelle with the poem, Dylan Thomas's poem. Haiku, terza rima, ode, blank verse, epic, which we have looked at with Beowulf, a limerick, and an elegy. So these are the terms that you will be held accountable for. You do need to know the definitions of these different types of poetry. So please make sure that you go through these. The first poem you're actually going to be reading is pastoral. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means as well. And the second one you're going to read is a sonnet. But make sure you go through these, look at the different types of poetic forms so that you're familiar with those as we start reading the poetry in this class. Now, what you are going to do now is you're going to read your first poem. I'm going to click on the link and pull it up now. You are reading The Passionate Shepherd to His Love. This is published in 1599, so we're taking a big jump back from the poem we just read in 1951. It's by Christopher Marlowe. The time period that we are starting with is the Renaissance. I mentioned we're going to move pretty quickly through different time periods. You had your modern poem. We're now in the Renaissance. We'll do another Renaissance poem with Shakespeare's sonnet, which you're doing tomorrow at home, which will be posted tomorrow. And then we'll get into Victorian and Romantic as well. But we're starting with Renaissance. You are going to read the poem. I want you to read through it first. Just don't worry about anything. Just read through it. Then there are tasks at the bottom. The first task asks you to highlight things, and the second or the next 3 tasks ask you to answer questions. You are just going to directly edit on this document, and then you are going to click submit. So that this, I can see that you've completed the work for today. This will be a classwork grade, so please make sure that you have completed this by today. Okay. That is all I have to talk to you about your introduction to poetry and poetic terms. You are reading your first poem again today, and then once you're done with that, you have time to work on your TED Talk. Please, if you have any questions about your TED Talk, please be asking me. Make sure that you are actually working on your TED Talk. Those presentation days are coming up. If you are an A-Day student, you know I changed the date for your TED Talk. So please make sure that you are cognizant of that and that you are working and making sure that this TED Talk gets complete. If you do have any questions and you would like to personally talk to me instead of just sending me messages on Remind, send me a message and we can find a time for us to Google Meet together. Pretty open for any time during the day to do that. And we can chat about your TED Talk before that presentation day, because that will be the next time we see each other, okay? So if you have any questions, let me know. Other than that, I'm setting you loose to go read your first poem. Thanks, guys.